Hi, my name is Jon Harding, and in this YouTube I'm going to talk about New Zealand sandflies. In particular, I'm going to cover some of the main questions you may have about sandflies and tell you a little bit about the science behind them. The first European records of sandflies comes from Joseph Banks, who accompanied James Cook in his voyages. In 1770, Banks recorded the presence of biting flies that attacked the crew. He called them sandflies because of their similarity with biting flies in England. What Joseph Banks didn't know was that these animals are not the same biting flies that he knew from Holmes. So the sandflies back in UK belong to a different family of flies. In New Zealand, our flies are actually black flies. They're from a completely different family, members of the family Simulidae. As it happens, the term sandflies has become a generic term for many different types of biting flies, and the name sandflies has stuck in our New Zealand icon. In Maori mythology, there were several different stories about sandflies. One is that Fiordland was created with beautiful landscape. It was so spectacular that people would stop and marvel at the scenery. The goddess Hini Nui Tepo became angry at the people and created sandflies to bite them and get them back to work. The Maori name for sandflies is Te Namu, and the name Namu is actually used broadly in many other Pacific islands for biting flies. And sometimes, often Namu is used to refer to mosquitoes as well, as compared to just sandflies. Many locations throughout New Zealand have names associated with sandflies. Early explorers suggested names such as Venom Point, Bloodsucker Sound, great names. Fortunately, however, these names weren't kept. But today we do still have Sandfly Bay, Te Namu Bay, Sandfly Point, which are all well named because of the large numbers of sandflies on them, and also pretty well known locations. The 19 different species of sandflies currently described in New Zealand. All of these are members of the genus Ostrosymulum, which is found only in New Zealand. Many of the New Zealand species have very restricted distributions and are only found in specific regions, such as shown in this map here, Ostrosymulum dugdalii, which is only found on the central North Island. In contrast, a couple of species, two in particular, occur widely throughout New Zealand. For example, again on the right-hand side in this map, Ostrosymulum australensis. Globally, there's more than 1,200 species of black flies. However, of our 19 species, only 3 bite humans and other larger animals. Of these 3 species, only the females bite. We actually don't know much about the males. They probably feed on nectar and other liquids. Here's an example of non-biting midge swarming. Sandflies probably mate by swarming, although actually that's not well documented, so we're not entirely sure about that. The swarm often consists of males, and the female fly flies through the swarm and is then chased by the males. Some years ago, I was standing out on a riverbed in the mountains and noticed a swarm of sandflies clustering above my head. I was thinking, oh boy, here I am, I'm going to be in trouble soon. But I wasn't getting bitten, and I realised that these were probably all males. So here was I, a big mobile blood bank, which would attract females, and the males could then mate with them. So why does the female want a blood meal? The proteins in the blood enable her to produce more eggs. Typically, a female without a blood meal might produce 10 or so eggs. However, after a blood meal, she might be able to produce as many as 150 to 600 eggs. So where do they lay their eggs? Well, the female usually lays her eggs on stones and wood in nearby streams because the eggs and the juveniles live in flowing water. Generally speaking, we don't find sandfly eggs in ponds and lakes because this isn't where the larvae are going to live. So let's talk a little bit about the life cycle. The sandfly life cycle is actually quite complex. The female lays her eggs under the water on boulders and wood and leaves. And the juveniles or larvae of the sandfly hatch and live in the stream or river, developing over several months. The larvae can molt between 5 and 9 times. That's what we call instars, and the number of molts depends on the different species. Each time they molt, they get bigger and bigger until finally they form a pupal cocoon, and inside they pupate, a bit like a monarch butterfly. This all happens underwater. Finally, the pupa metamorphoses into an adult, and the adult emerges and starts the whole process again. The Simula larvae doesn't look anything like an adult. It doesn't go around sucking blood. In fact, it feeds on very fine particles of organic matter, bits of ground up leaves and wood, which are carried along in the water column in the stream. The fans on its head act like a sieve so they can catch this fine organic matter. Often you can see hundreds of Simula larvae on the tops of stones, especially in fast water, and they bend in the water column. In this photo, you can see that the path of the current flowing over the stone just by looking at the way in which the sandflies are pointing. The larvae are actually really important for the ecology of streams and rivers. They're actually important food sources for stream insects, such as the predatory stonefly Stenoperla shown here, and also for fish. So they play a really important role in processing that fine organic matter that's in streams. One of the main misconceptions about sandflies is that they bite and suck your blood. Shown here is a scanning electron micrograph, which shows you a close-up of the adult mandibles, the adult teeth. And you can see that in fact they're serrated teeth, and the fly uses this to cut or tear your skin. Then they lap up the blood, releasing histamine. And histamine's a hormone which regulates our immune responses. And this enables the sandfly to draw blood from your wound. It's very common for people to develop itchy hives or welts from sandflies. You can see here on the right hand side is, on the next slide is a photo of me, and I haven't developed itchy hives at all. After years of being bitten, I may have developed an immunity to this species of sandfly anyway. Or it might just be that the cocktail of medicines that my doctors put me on have reduced the effect of sandfly bites. In fact, the sandfly that has my blood from this meal probably came off worse than I did from this encounter. So, when and where are sandflies most active? They have been shown to be more active at dawn and dusk, and when it's about to rain. Because sandflies feed on organic matter in streams and rivers, they're often very abundant in forested streams. They are also often very high densities in lake outlets, where plankton from the lake can be an enormous food resource. So they're feeding on this organic matter and plankton that's coming out of the lake. And as you move further down the lake outlet, the river from the lake, the number of sandflies actually drops away quite dramatically. So how do sandflies even survive before humans arrived in New Zealand? Well, probably prior to our arrival, there were lots of large blood animals, for example, penguins and seals, and probably forested birds. However, since we've arrived, then we've provided them with a wider range of potential blood meals. Do some people get attacked more than others? Yes. In fact, it's been shown that some people do attract sandflies more than other people. We're not entirely sure what causes this, but it may be due to differences in body odour, CO2 production, so there's some suggestion they're attracted to carbon dioxide, and possibly even clothing colour. One option to protect yourself is to cover yourself up, but there are also a wide range of insect repellents on the market, including many homegrown solutions like this Marmite here. I think you'd have to probably eat a lot of Marmite before you provided any protection from sandflies. Personally, I've found eucalyptus-based repellents to be really good and not as harsh as the DEET ones, which can dissolve the plastic on your watches and things like that. In other regions around the world, particularly in Africa and North America, black flies are vectors of human diseases. In particular, they are major vectors of river blindness, and many millions of people are affected by this disease which black flies are a vector for. In North America, many states actually spray for black flies, and they spray the water as shown here. And they're spraying an insecticide called BTI, which actually controls the larvae and the young. Fortunately, in good old New Zealand, none of our 19 species transmit human diseases. Instead, our sandflies remain, well, a nuisance, but sometimes give us some mementos of our visit the last days at a particular site that we went to. Well, I hope you found this YouTube interesting and informative. So next time you get attacked by sandflies, you might understand a little bit more about what makes them tick and why they attack people.